So, Peter, part of our lifecycle extension program, we are trying to gather best practices from all the people who have went through a lot of processes or initiatives that are kind of difficult to replicate. You are basically a multiple serial new initiatives champion. Mm-hmm. You are now at least a second initiative that you are doing with Yonder. And I feel that you get a lot of the starting a new initiative, the requirements part, very well and very good. So can you explain a little bit the process behind starting a new initiative? What is the driver, for instance, for a new product or a new initiative?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's got to start with a customer problem, a problem we're trying to solve, and it starts with an idea. I think that's the most important thing. Is it's an idea, it's organic, it starts with customer problem, and then from there you try to figure out what's the solution, how do we solve it, and then you can worry about everything else after that. But it's got to start with a customer problem that we're trying to address. That's the key.
How do you discover that problem? Is it coming from support, or you have to be actually on ground
some
present
comes
there?
through support, but a lot of that, if it comes through support, it's filtered. So a lot of it is just customer outreach, just talking to the customer and just getting on a one-on-one level with the customers. That's super important, and trust is important too, because customers, they want to talk to people that they trust. They don't want, like, not talking bad about sales, but they don't want to talk to a salesman, right? They want to talk to somebody who has domain experience, that understands their problem, and somebody that they can trust in. So it starts a lot with just one-on-one interaction and customers trusting that you can deliver them solutions that'll solve their problems.
So basically, what is the role as which you go to the customers to get that trust? Because you mentioned sales is maybe not the right channel for doing that.
It's hard to say. I think it's just years of experience, just working with the software and working with the domain, understanding their workflow. You got to kind of speak their language. I work in healthcare, so you have to kind of know their workflow, and you have to know what they're going through on a daily basis. I mean, you don't have to like live it, but you have to understand what they're going through. So I guess sympathy, right? Sympathetic to customers, understanding what they're going through and being able to kind of talk their language.
Yeah. Do you have customer visits that are just with the purpose of seeing how they are doing, what their troubles, troubles are, what their pain points are, and so on?
Yeah. We go out to customer sites. We try to keep it kind of open-ended. A lot of it will come back to application problems, defects, bugs, things like that. Ultimately, it'll, discussion will lead to that. But we do checkpoints, we just go in and how are things going? How can we help you? What are the problems that you're dealing with? So just open discussion with customers.
And is it a particular user type that you're targeting with the questions, or that you're observing, like the end users, or you are talking with the IT staff that's responsible for the infrastructure? How do you get the right level to actually see the problems that they are having?
It's a mix, but you really have to get that user experience, you got to get down to the actual user. So people that are, they're on the keyboard, they're on their mobile phone, they're dealing with the problems. We deal with healthcare, so it's actual patient interaction. So you got to get down to that user level, people that are interacting with patients. But then sometimes you got to take it up a few levels, right? Because a lot of times they're not the decision makers for budgetary or technology. Like you have to go up a couple levels, maybe talk to an IT director or a chief information officer, a CIO. And more recently now with electronic health systems, there's a new position, Chief Medical Information Officer, so CMIO. So they're clinically driven, but they have a background in technology, so they can help making in decisions for the hospital on what technologies to decide on and what software programs to implement.
Right. Do you think there are specific type of clients that can help you envisioning that solution to the problem, or basically you can go to any of the customers and try to ask for help in figuring out how the solution should look like, what the problems are? Are there customers that can help you more in kind of shedding lights on the problems that they have and trying to work with you to find a solution? Are there specific type of such customers?
For sure. I mean, it's just like anything. There's good customers and there's bad customers, right? So you really want to talk with customers that are offering solutions, not necessarily just giving you their problems or complaining all the time. But there's definitely there's customers that are a little bit more open to dialogue and discussion and problem solving, and those are the customers that we target. Ones that are willing to work with us, because they have their, just like everybody else, they have their day jobs, right? So they take care of patients. So it's always extra, right? If you're dealing with a vendor or if you're working with them to solve problems, it's always a little bit extra for them. So it takes a certain customer, right? Customers that are willing to go beyond their normal day jobs to work with us to find and help solve problems. So that's super important. And it's not like there's good customers and there's bad customers. So, it's hard to find the really good ones that want to kind of go the extra mile and work with us to help solve their problem.
And I would imagine to be able to discover these customers, you have to be on ground, you have to be in contact with them to gain their trust. So you have to have a relationship in there. That's why getting out of the business and in front of the customer is that important.
Yeah, absolutely. We deal with software, so we deal with code and backlogs and grooming, but there's always the human aspect of, there's the software, but then there's the human aspect of it, and that's super important. So it's, developers, they just work at their desks, right? They don't really interact with the customers, but I think it's important for them to understand the problems that they're trying to solve. You can really only solve them or understand them unless you've seen it or you're sympathetic to who you're developing for. So having that kind of customer interaction one-on-one is super important.
And once you discover a pain point, for instance, do you use anything like hypothesis-driven approach to try to determine for which segment of customers would that pain point be critical, how many of them would be willing to pay, and so on? Do you try to look at the problems from this perspective prior to engaging into kind of a new initiative? There's being like an initiative champion, you kind of have to, you're a jack of all trades, so you kind of have to have an idea, a creative side about things, but then you have to be kind of scientific about your hypothesis and proving your hypothesis, and then there's obviously the financials that come into it too. So it's you have to kind of work both sides of the coin being a champion. So you have to understand the science and math about it, but then also you have to understand the human aspect, the sympathetic portion of solving problems. So but it's not like, you don't sit down in a laboratory and write out my hypothesis. It's more just part of the thinking process, right? Is trying to engage customers into entering kind of a paid model in which they would actually be required to contribute to the risk of the initiative with a certain amount of money important in terms of the conversation about the specific feature, in the sense that once a customer is committed, is it willing to be more part of the process as opposed to maybe a customer that's, of course, every idea, it's a great idea, every improvement is a great improvement, that would basically acknowledge everything that you say. So does the fact that we require them to commit to a certain idea or initiative changes the conversation into a better conversation?
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough to ask customers for like an investment or money up front for a product that doesn't exist, right? So it really comes down to talking to them about the value that it's going to provide. And it's important though to get a little investment, because you want customers to have some skin in the game, right? If they think that something that you're developing is important enough, they're going to pay for that, right? There's value in that. So they'll find value in something. That's why like figuring out their real problem is important, because like they're gonna pay. Yeah, they'll pay something for a big enough problem that you're going to solve. And the fact that they're willing to commit to something that doesn't even exist tells a lot about the problem that you're trying to solve. So there's definitely value in that. You don't want customers to just we'll go ahead and do that, right, and then you get into it 3 months from now and then they're gone, right? Like you've spent all this time with them and they had nothing invested, right? So they can just walk away, right? So it's important to get that customer commitment, not just like a verbal commitment, but also them willing to put some skin in the game. Because the key is solving the problems that are big enough for them to want to pay for that to be solved.
So basically, the payment part is important because it basically validates the value of the initiative.
Absolutely.
So if you find customers that are willing to pay for a solution, it means that the problem in itself is worth the investment. And from this perspective, once you, for instance, manage to get customers committed to an initiative or an idea, how do you make sure that you keep that to an MVP, minimum viable product, so you actually not end up building a huge colossus from the first year?
It's tough. Like I mentioned, you kind of have to be, like, as an initiative champion, you kind of have to be a jack of all trades. So you got to put your project manager hat on, and you really got to control the scope. But it starts early on. You let them know up front before they actually pay that when we get this started, right, there has to be a very specific scope, or else we're never going to get this thing done, right? So you have to put your no hat on, and you got to say no sometimes, right? Because, I mean, you always, like, technology is always evolving. You're always going to want more and more and more, but it'll never end. So you have to define a scope even before you go into it, and let the customers know up front, this is what it's going to be, right? But tell them why you're doing it. And a lot of them, like, we work in healthcare, they don't understand the whole software development lifecycle and how this can just keep creeping. So it helps to just explain to them how it works, like a simple little button, right? In the customer's mind, just add this button here, right? It seems simple from an end user perspective, but there's a lot that goes into that. Writing requirements, how do you want it to react, what page to go to next, what color do you want? So there's some things that seem simple are really not that simple. So if you help them understand the entire development process, it definitely helps when you kind of lay the law down on, we're not gonna increase scope, but if you want to, you're gonna have to pay for it, right? Because time is money when it comes down to it. So it's really about kind of controlling the scope and making sure that customers understand that, like, you're not trying to be mean, right? You're just trying to get the same results, get results that are gonna solve their problem.
Is it about trying to solve pain points to customers, or more about, or it's not necessarily more, but it's also about creating up possibilities or opening up possibilities? What they are more willing to invest in, when they have actually a problem that hurts, that takes time away, or when actually there is an opportunity to create time, or maybe to create to open fronts to them?
I think it's more of the former. I think they're really they're focused on problems that need to be solved, not necessarily like the potential. At least in our domain in healthcare, it's really about maximizing your time, spending more time with patients, and how can I do my job more efficiently, right? So those are all problems they're trying to solve, not necessarily like, innovation. At least in our domain, that's what I've experienced. It's more problem solving, not necessarily like forward thinking into the future. So but some customers are like that. They're a little more tech savvy and they're a little more forward thinking, but I think that's more exception than the rule.
Once you find out a pain point, something that has a potential to become a new initiative, how do you get from one idea to a backlog of an MVP of an initiative?
Yeah, it's all part of the process, the iterative process. It's really about the key thing for like product people like myself involved in the product is just listening, right? Just listening to the customer, not necessarily like, because we always want to try to solve stuff right away, like give me a solution, like, I can do that. But it's really about just like early on, just listening, right? Listening to their problems, getting it documented, putting it in the backlog, and letting, a lot of times development teams, they have architects and developers that are a lot smarter than the product people, and just telling their story and letting them come up with the solution. So using your resources for what they get paid to do is coming up with, the right technology and the right solutions to solve their problems. So, it's all part of the, the software development lifecycle, right? It's about listening to their problems getting it documented, and then presenting the problems to the engineers, right? And they're the smart ones in the room, right. So you trust them to come up with the solutions that are going to work.
I happen to know that you actually, before starting building any product, you went through a number of iterations, trying to do a mock-up, some prototypes, validating those with the customers. How important is that process, and how long can it be?
Super important. It's like everything seems good when you talk about it, but if you want customers to believe in an idea, it has to be something tangible, especially with software. It has to be something that they can see, that they can interact with, because there's always going to be a human interaction. And for humans, like, they need to feel, like they need to see something. I'm the same way. You're a coder, so you probably, oh, he laughed. I got him to smile. But again, it goes back to the human aspect. Like, if I am going to buy something or buy into something, it has to be something that I can see. So prototyping is huge. It's huge. When the first initiative that I was involved with, I worked with you guys, which was wonderful. And I had pitched ideas to customers. I had done webinars, and really, like, the idea was great. Like, oh, that's awesome. Yeah, that's great. But really no takers, no investors until I had a prototype, clickable wireframe, something that they could see, like, this is what we're thinking. And it looks totally different from the prototype, but that really doesn't matter, because it's something that they can see, something that they can experience. It goes back to that human aspect. It has to be something that that they can visualize and see. It can't just be words, right? And it can't just be like a PowerPoint, like a bullet point. It can't be that. It's got to be something that they can interact with. So prototyping, clickable wireframes, that is super important to getting customer buy-in. So it really starts, it starts with an idea, but then you have to prototype something. And it doesn't have to be the finished product. It just has to be something that they can see, like they can, buy into or believe in, right?
So beyond the getting the buy-in part, how important is the prototyping part to trying to refine the ideas or the scope or the kind of functionalities that are behind?
It's definitely, it's really important, and it's an iterative process. Like when we worked on our mobile application, we went through a lot of different iterations, tweaking, like micro adjustments, but it all just helps with the process. And it helps the developers too, because they understand from a user perspective what the end goal is, right? What are we trying to accomplish? What are we trying to solve? So it definitely helps to have the prototypes, because it provides a framework or a guideline for the developers as well, right? So they know what the user is going through.
So you basically went with the prototype back to the customers to get feedback and so on. Did you try to do a selection of the customers, in the sense that trying to have a cross-section between smaller, bigger, medium customers, or did you try to target a specific segment of the customers?
It was just really, we just wanted customers to buy in. So it didn't matter if they were large or big. I mean, it's really hard, at least in healthcare, there's not a whole lot of demand for customers willing to try or beta something, because it sounds cliche, but they're taking care of people on the computer, right? They're not willing to try something that may not work, or it may break, or maybe this allergy won't trigger. Oh, but it's okay, we're just testing. Like, there's not a big appetite for that in the healthcare space, because they're actually taking care of patients. So I figured, like, we're gonna do this mobile app, it's gonna be awesome, they're all gonna sign up. No, I mean, that's why it takes a certain customer, a special customer willing to devote the time to understand, like, it's not gonna be perfect at first, right? But you're gonna help us make it good for you and good for everybody else. So it takes a certain customer. They're not all willing to sign up for something that may not work at first, but we'll perfect it. But it's all part of the process. So it's really special, certain customers that want to do it.
I would imagine that different customers and corporations have different processes. So the requirements or the expectations part from an initiative could be quite different depending on who you approach. how do you manage to get everybody aligned on a set of features? Do you get everybody on the same table and try to get out with a set of agreed requirements, or do you try to negotiate independently with each of them a set of features that would probably kind of be a good mixture?
Yeah, it's tricky because like it's probably never really good to just have one customer sign up for something, because they're naturally just going to make it theirs, right? It's going to meet their needs. Oh, do this, do that, but that may meet their needs, but not the 80% of the other customers. So it's definitely important to get you have to have at least 2, right? You got to keep it honest, but 3 is good. And how I did it with our mobile application is I didn't talk to them all at the same time. I had individual meetings separate during the week, and then I would toss the ideas out from the other customers, just dropping little hints. See, what do you guys think about this? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, but that's maybe not how we want. Well, how would you want to do it? Would that work good for another customer? Yeah, I think so, pretty much. So it's kind of like a social experiment, right? You just kind of toss things up, and then a lot of like that's how we shot down a lot of ideas. It's like, that's way too specific for you guys. It's not going to work for everybody else. So, I mean, what do you think? And usually, like the good customers, like they appreciate that, right? And they can understand that we're building this thing, but it needs to be like what's good for the goose is good for the gander, right? So, and they appreciate that as long as you explain to them how the process is going to work. Like, we're going to build this. It's going to be good for you, right? But let's think about all the other caregivers that are in your same universe. How do you think they would react to something like that? Yeah, and they're honest with you. You know, the thing is, it's just being transparent with your customers and letting them know like how the process works and how these things get done.
And I would imagine there is quite a lot of features at some point that the imagination kicks in, and they would probably want all kind of things like bells and whistles. Mm-hmm. How do you manage things that might not be part of the MVP, but they would still require at some point?
It's hard because like with customers, I'm very customer focused. So like if they want something, oh yes, we can do that. Yeah, yes, we can do that. But you would never finish a product just by saying yes. So it really starts like from the beginning, like what we talked about before, is establishing scope, right? And you have to be a little elastic with it, right? I mean, you let things come in, but you also need to say no when the scope is going to get way out of whack. So it's kind of it's a balance, right? You got to put your project manager hat on, like this. It's going to come down to what's it going to take, right? How much effort, risk reward, like for the benefit, right? Yeah. You know what I mean? So it comes down to just making sure that you understand how much work it's actually going to take versus what's the potential? No one's going to benefit from this. No, we're not going to do it. Right. So you have to just make sure you're clear with the customers on, how that works. And if there is something that they say we need to have that in there, it was never in scope. I mean, and you put your project manager hat on and you charge them for a change request, right? Because that's kind of nice, but we're not willing to pay for that. So maybe it's not that important, right? So when you, like as a project manager, you get firm with them and say, okay, that's a great idea. We're already locked into scope. It's going to cost this much, right? Oh no, we're not willing. Okay, well, it's not that important. If it's super important, they will pay for it, right? It's something that needs to be in there. They're willing to pay for it. And that's super important to have those kind of guidelines when you're running a project, is to understand, here's our scope, it's established. Well, there's a little elasticity in there, but it's going to depend on how much work is required and is it providing extra value? Because if it's going to cost us money to do this, and if the customer is willing to pay to get that change done, then it's probably something you should have done in the first place. So it's worth a scope change, right?
Right. So Agile in itself does look at the product owner as a customer representative, and there is periodic demos in showing mm-hmm. the value and the product has been built. Did you show anything from the sprint demos while the product was built to the actual customers? Or did you wait until the product actually completed, the MVP completed?
No, and that's part of the whole selling process with customers, is getting them to sign up, is letting them know that they're going to be part of the process. Like, they're going to help us make the sausage, right? Like, they're going to see the guts and the nuts and bolts of it. And that's part of why a customer would want to sign up, because they want to see, like, what's the progress? Like, I want to know, like, I gave you this feedback, you listened, and did you put it in? Oh yeah, that looks great. That's exactly what we wanted. So it's part of the selling process, get early adopters, is letting them know this is an iterative process. We're going to take your feedback. We'll determine if it's, if it's willing to, make it into the code, and then we will show you at the end of the week or the end of the sprint, right? That usually 2-week sprints. At the end of the sprint, this is what you said. We listened. Is this what you expect? And a lot of times it's yes. Oh, that's awesome. You know what I mean? And they feel like bought into that, because you're actually taking their feedback and incorporating it into the entire process. And that's what you sell them on. Like, hey, you guys, you get into this, like, you're gonna have a voice, right? That this is what's in it for you, is you get to control it as much as you want, right? Within certain guidelines. But that's part of why they would buy in the first place, is I want to be able to let the developer know, like, how we want this done and why it would benefit. So they're part of the whole process, and it definitely helps in the selling process to get them signed up early, because they can be part of the
Right. So basically, when you start the actual selling process, is it something that you start after you finish the MVP? So basically, you're focusing on the group of customers that sign in for the MVP, and you focus on the MVP. And once that's finished and clear and deployed and demoed and accepted, you start looking for other customers or the next version of the product, or you start that even earlier while still working on MVP?
Yeah, you got to start early. So it's part of just being kind of a salesman. You know what I mean? You're selling something that maybe doesn't really exist, but it's an idea. So you got to start early in the process of selling the idea, and having the wireframes and things like that. It's got to be something that they can see, right? So it really starts with that prototype coming out of the gate. The prototype, you present it to customers like, hey, this is what you guys, this is your problem. This is what we think is what you're willing to, help us solve. And it's, it starts early on. You got to keep selling it the whole time.
So basically, you never stop in the process.
Nope.
Okay. Getting back to the product manager head, how do you keep on with the current legislation changes, the complexity of the new rules and regulations and so on? How do you make sure that you're kind of prepared and not surprised by changes in legislation that could have an impact on especially the legacy products? Because with newer products, usually the code base and scope is smaller, and thus the changes are potentially less impactful. But with older products, with larger code bases, major changes in legislation could have a major change in the maintainability or things of the code.
Yeah, it's definitely hard, and a lot of times what happens is legislation will drive the features that we develop, right? Because it's something that the government, at least in the U.S., it's something that the government says you have to do this, right? There are penalties or there are rewards if you do that. So customers, they're forced to do something, and we have to comply with that. So a lot of like the features that we develop are driven sometimes by legislation, and things are changing all the time. Especially in the U.S., there's laws and security, and a lot of new healthcare policies are coming into effect all of the time. So it's virtually impossible for any one person to follow everything. So we have a team in Harris Healthcare that helps monitor kind of the daily activities, and they filter out a lot of the noise, and they'll specifically mention things that, okay, this is important for you guys. You probably should do something here. So it's impossible to follow everything, but we have a doctor that we use and we share. It's a shared resource for all of Harris Healthcare, and she filters out a lot of that noise and really pinpoints the important things that we need to do as a business unit that will impact our users. So it definitely helps. It's not like any one person can't follow all the legislation change. It's changing all the time.
As a product manager, how do you feel about technical innovation versus functional innovation? You know, developers are very, very focused on the technical innovation.
Sure,
They
sure.
want to always play with the latest tools and nicest toys. But as a product manager, how do you feel about this?
I try to not have feelings when it comes to technical decisions because I don't know enough about it, right? I'm more of a like product creative. Here's a problem. Here's what we're trying to solve. You guys figure it out. And you just have to trust that the developers they're gonna do code or recommend code that's going to be cost effective, that's going to be efficient, and it's gonna solve the problem. So you kind of have to have blind faith in your resources that they're gonna offer solutions that are gonna work, right? Obviously for, if it's legacy code, right? Sometimes that code's, really bad. And hopefully they don't make it worse by developing worse legacy code, or if there's potential like more modern solutions, more modern code, you hope that they come up with those ideas so that you can implement them. But it's like, as a product manager, like we're gonna have issues if I'm starting to recommend like table structure or what code to have. Like if I'm doing that, then we have a problem. Like there's danger. Peter is recommending this code, not good. That is not good for anybody. We don't want that.
Do you think developers have a clear differentiation between technical innovation and functional innovation? In the sense that many times I'm just noticing that for people, innovation is automatically technical innovation, while for the customers, the innovation that really matters is never technical, it's functional innovation. So
they don't care.
They don't care.
They want it to work this way. So I don't care how you do it.
How you ensure that actually all the developers that work with you understand the distinction between technical and functional innovation, the one that matters to the customers? And
it's hard. Yeah, there's no easy solution for understanding. What we try to do is adequately explain the problem to the developers so they're at least sympathetic to the problem that we're trying to solve, right? We can never ask them to, live the life of a doctor or a nurse, but, it comes down to the product owner. It's their job to make sure that developers understand why am I doing this? Like why am I doing this widget, right? What is this doing? And it comes down to their product team. That's what they're paid to do, is to translate the complex requirements, a lot of times for the customer, the problems that we're trying to solve. And how does that translate into a developer, right? Yeah. So and a lot of times the developers love it. They appreciate it, like, okay, I'm gonna build this widget, but why? And they appreciate what? Sit them down, talk to them, okay, here's what happens. What would you do, right? What would you do if you were in this situation? Would you want to click that every time you did so? No, that would be super annoying, right? So developers are smart, right? They always say like, developers are lazy, right? They're the laziest people. We want to write more efficient code, right? So as long as you sit down and have a conversation with them about the problems they're trying to solve, a lot of times they're super, receptive to that.
Right.
Yep.
What do you think are the skills that makes a great new initiative champion?
That's a very, very difficult question. And honestly, a champion, it's only gonna really work if you're a true champion and you believe and you have passion in what you're doing, right? Because it's hard, right? You gotta do the sales, you gotta do the pitching, you gotta figure out, is there a market for this? Is this gonna work? How much is this gonna cost? Is there a benefit for our customers? And then, you wanna get involved in the technology, but you kind of have to oversee and make sure that the technology that you're making is the right decision for the customers. So you kind of have to do everything, but none of that's gonna matter if you don't care about the product you're doing, right? If you care about it and you're truly passionate about it, you're gonna wanna do it, right? Because it's yours. Like, this is my baby. I'm going to do this for my customers. And the most important is just be passionate about the product that you're doing. And I think that also comes from understanding the customers, right? And sympathizing with the customers. That's super important, is just, being passionate about what you're doing.
So basically, a good champion starts with somebody that has been with the customers, understand the domain, is familiar with both the customers and the domain.
Absolutely. Yep. It all starts with the customers, right? It all goes down to that end user. What are they? Put yourself in their situation. If you had to do these tasks, right? What would you want this software to do to make your life easier? So really it comes down to that end user is reaching out to the customer and understanding what they're truly going through and what you're trying to solve. So it all starts with that. It starts and ends with that, basically, is the end user.
Well, thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you.
I think it matters a lot.
Yeah.
I wish you good luck with your current initiative and the many new initiatives that are going to come, I'm sure.
Thank you. Yes, I hope it goes well, and I hope we get a lot of customers that sign up for it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.